Hi, welcome to Legal Talk with Stacy Clark. It's my goal to provide you with information that will help you in your personal and professional life. And today we have an extraordinary guest. Her name is Amy De Shong. She's a partner with Wisler Pearlstine, which is one of the area's most preeminent law firms, practicing in all different areas. Amy has been practicing for 34 years in the area of family law, which includes divorce, alimony, and child custody. And boy, is that a hot area right now. In addition, she's listed in the current edition of U.S. News and World Report's Best Lawyers for Family Law. So she has gotten national acclaim for her practice. So I'm delighted to welcome Amy and to talk about what is happening and what's blowing up her phones right now during the coronavirus episode, shall we say. So Amy, welcome. What's going on? I don't even know where to begin to ask you. What's going on at your office? What are you hearing from parents?
Well, first of all, Stacy, I just want to thank you very much for having me on your show. And I would have to say that a lot of things are blowing up right now. Some people are behaving very well, and other people are behaving very badly. And so I'd be happy to talk to you about the details of what we're experiencing.
Yeah.
What's happening, the courts are closed until April 30th, as you are already aware. And so for the first 2 weeks, I'd say folks behaved pretty well. The novelty was there. You know, we all just kind of pulled together, tried to do the best we could. But last week, we started to see folks kind of taking matters into their own hands. And rather than call their attorneys first and ask permission to take matters into their own hands, so to speak, or, you know, ask whether it's okay to violate a custody order, for example, people just went ahead and did what they thought was best. And then we're finding ourselves kind of cleaning up after the fact. The bottom line is that custody orders are in full force and effect, and people are to comply with custody orders. However, they don't always look at it that way. So that's one of the things that's been blowing up our phones.
So when you say people are not complying with their custody orders, even though they have to be compliant under the law, can you give us some examples what people are doing, how people are being sort of footloose and fancy free right now, or being overly protective, not providing their child to the other parent when they're supposed to? Talk to us about that.
We're experiencing both. I think that what's a couple situations that I've dealt with and or heard about include people who are already on vacation retaining children instead of sending them home or bringing them home. I've got situations where folks are just refusing to follow a custody schedule, either out of reasonable fear, or they may be using the COVID situation as an excuse to withhold a child from the other parent. We're also seeing situations where parents are in the healthcare field and folks are kind of struggling to figure out what's a reasonable precaution versus what's maybe a little bit of what I would call maybe just unreasonable fear. You know, certainly valid, certainly actual fear, but just maybe not quite as reasonable.
I see. So just because a parent works in the healthcare field is no reason to not be compliant with the child custody arrangement.
That's my take on it, yes. I think some attorneys maybe wouldn't agree with that, but that's my take on it.
Okay, so in the best of all possible worlds, if parents are cooperating, this situation right now is having a serious effect on children. Can you talk to us about what's in the best interest of a child during the COVID epidemic?
Yeah, Stace, I've been thinking of it kind of like a COVID overlay, if you will. And so what I'm asking my clients to think about, and I represent men as often as women, I represent both sides of these situations. I'm asking them to give some serious thought to what is happening to the kid right now. I don't know about you. I suspect you were the same. I was a pretty anxious, high performance kid. And so kids they don't have the routine of school right now. Yes, there's online learning, but they're probably very worried about where I am in my performance for my school year. I don't have music right now. I don't have sports. I don't have the same kind of access to my friends. Maybe I'm even experiencing some cyberbullying right now. I'm not seeing my grandparents. I can't get away from my siblings. All of this is going on for me, and I'm your kid. And the last thing I want is for you and my dad or my mom to start fighting because I'm already dealing with all this other stuff. And that's what I kind of call the COVID overlay. And so I'm just, it doesn't do any good to lecture parents and tell them like that they should be better or they should be worse or, they should be handling things differently. It's more just a question of tuning into your kid and what your kid is already experiencing. And then my own view is that if you're a good mom or dad, the best interests kind of follow from that.
Mm.
And perhaps I'm a little bit naive in that regard, but I think often it just takes a couple conversations with a client who's already a good mom or dad to kind of say, okay, now let's decide, um, how important is it that you're going to take this particular position now that we've thought through what your kid is already experiencing?
What if the child doesn't want to leave the parent that they're with and go to the other parent's home per the custody arrangement?
That's an excellent question. And I think we're going to probably see more of that as this situation continues. What I'll call this kind of suspended animation situation. Um, I'm a firm believer in you follow the custody order and you keep the child on the custody routine. And so, just like with school, how many of us really looked forward to jumping back onto that school bus on Monday morning at 6:30? You're you want to do what you were doing in the past, which is look, it's time to go see your other parent. You're going to have a good time. This is we're going to keep to this routine. It may be the only routine really that's left for the family. I think you also want to think about it in terms of can we break up the routine a little bit? Can we maybe say that a child's going to have one-on-one time with the other parent? The siblings haven't had a chance to be separate from one another. So maybe the 12-year-old goes and he sees the other parent for a while, and you keep the 8-year-old, and then you switch. I think parents ought to remember too that they could use a break from their kids right about now. So think about it in terms of your own needs. Little Joey goes over to see his mom. That's great. That means that dad's got the downtime or mom's got the downtime to recharge, maybe to do some work, whatever it is. It might even just be household chores, but think of it in terms of that too, that your own needs as a parent are, hey, I could use the next 24 hours to myself or my coworkers, whatever it is. But to answer your question maybe more directly, no, I think you follow the routine, you stick with the order. I think the parents who have a hard time right now in particular are the ones who aren't used to saying no to their kids, or maybe the kid runs the show normally.
Right.
So, of course, the kid's going to test those limits now.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing,
So,
sorry,
go ahead. No, you go ahead.
The other thing that you just made me think of too is if a child is kind of signaling that maybe there are some safety concerns in the other parent's household.
Yeah.
Maybe the other parent is one of these folks who's kind of defiant about COVID, maybe is not really following precautions. And that's when you'd like to think the parents could talk to one another and figure that out.
For sure. Sure. Well, that kind of brings me to my next question. What if one of the parents is playing games, whether or not it's because of the virus, and the courts are closed? Does the other parent have any legal remedies?
Right now, absent emergency, the truthful answer to that question is no. And there's no worse feeling than powerlessness in the face of the other parent's misconduct. I mean, that is just a horrible feeling. So what I'm suggesting to my folks is keep careful track of the missed time, because failing a true emergency situation, you're probably going to have to ride some of it out and hope that council can work out compliance with the court order. But failing that, judges have long memories. Our judges are that once all of this ends and we get back into the regular court routine, in most counties, each family has their own judge. And so you're going to want to go in with a very concise petition for makeup time, and hopefully maybe some counsel fees or some other sanctions. But I don't want to mislead you about this, Stacy. My own view is that judges are going to be overwhelmed when this thing ends.
Yeah,
and they're really not going to be interested in figuring out who did what to whom. However, I feel they will be very interested in fairness by way of makeup time. If you cost me a couple weekends, boy, I'm going to get them back when all of this is over with. I might get, because I think judges will be very receptive to that.
So, what is an emergency, and what happens in an emergency situation right now?
I think in the first couple weeks of this COVID, what I call the COVID overlay, I think an emergency was pretty clearly going to have to require physical harm to a child or a threat of physical harm to a child. Now that we're in week 3 or week 4, depending on how you want to count it, the governor declared the first disaster, so to speak, on March 5th. I think now we're kind of in the realm of judges are going to have to treat withholding of children as an emergency. And that's what I'm starting to see. I'm starting to see emergency petitions that have to do with you're withholding the child, and you shouldn't be doing that. So that's what I think we're going to start to see in the coming weeks is emergencies like that.
And I think
However, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, you mentioned to me that you don't see your judge in an emergency. You see somebody else. Explain
Right.
that.
Right. I think what most of the counties are doing right now is they're plucking judges. They're plucking judges maybe out of their comfort zones, and they're having judges hear. Like, obviously the courts are closed, the courts are social distancing, they're trying very hard to protect their staff. So
Right.
what we're seeing is maybe 1 or 2 judges sitting for a full week or maybe a few days at a time, reviewing and deciding on these emergency petitions. Sometimes a judge is going to say, hey, this is not an emergency. And it's going to be up to the individual judge. And that particular judge may or may not be the judge who's already assigned to your case. So the luck of the draw is maybe at some point it will be the judge who's assigned to your case, but chances are it won't be.
Okay. And do you find that they have enough time to spend on these emergency petitions, or are they just being rained upon with so many of them that they can't give them the thought that maybe their normal judge would be able to?
It's interesting to say, I find that our judges are very caring, very careful professional people. And the experience that I've had with emergency so far has been a nice surprise in that the judges have been doing their best to carefully try to do the right thing. But they're not going to be able to pull up the dockets and read the case histories and kind of figure it out. It really is going to be very much a well-intentioned judge doing his or her best on the fly. I think that's what we're gonna be experiencing, and that's what my take on it is so far. I've been very proud of our bench so far, I have to say.
That's wonderful. That's very, very reassuring. It's great to know. So there are ramifications for playing willy-nilly right now with your custody arrangement?
Yes, there may be delayed ramifications on some situations, but yes, there are.
Okay, and when we spoke last week, we talked about that some children have therapists because of the situation that their families are in. I think your recommendation was keep those protocols up as well.
Yes, I think if you're a family who's lucky enough to already have a family therapist or a mediator or two good attorneys who are practical people, you should call upon them at this time for sure. That's what they're there for. That's what we're all here for.
Okay, so let's move away from custody for a minute and talk about alimony and child support. We've got lots of things happening here, people being furloughed, people suffering through layoffs, people not knowing if they're going to have another paycheck. And then you have people that are still getting paid. Talk to us about what the rights are of each parent right now as opposed to spousal and child support.
Well, that's another area where people need to comply and should continue to comply with their orders or their property settlement agreements. As you and I were chatting about this in preparation, alimony is one of those things that's often being paid pursuant to a contract called a marital settlement agreement,
Mm.
and folks need to continue to make those payments. Child support and spousal support are often pursuant to court order, and again, they should continue to make the payments.
Right,
That's kind of an optimistic thing to say, though, if you've just lost your job.
right, right.
So, what I'm suggesting to folks is contact your co-parent if you get furloughed or laid off, or there's an interruption in your income in some way. Let the other parent know what's going on, and then figure out what you can reasonably afford to pay, and then do that as consistently as possible.
I
Try
see.
to keep in the same rotation if it's weekly, biweekly, monthly. Um, we would normally just breezily say, oh, make sure you apply for unemployment compensation. Well, anyone who's following the news right now knows that that's kind of a nightmare right now.
Oh,
But that's what you should obviously do, because the CARES Act has certain provisions in it that are going to, where the states are supposed to try to make your unemployment compensation pretty well matched to your actual income that you've lost. But there's going to be a time lag on that. And um, people who are paying pursuant to court order are used to a system called the PACey system.
mm.
That has all kinds of scary enforcement machinery. And not to be too technical, but we've learned that they have suspended that scary enforcement machinery right now. So that's good news.
Wow.
So you don't have to think about credit bureau reporting and seizure of bank accounts and all the scary stuff that can happen if you miss a month's worth of support.
Oh, wow, that is scary.
But
um,
the other thing, Stace, if I can just finish
yeah,
that thought, the other thing you want to do is contact your attorney and file a petition to modify your support obligation if you expect that your change will be substantial and continuing. If it's temporary, probably no need to go to that trouble. But if it's going to be a continuing change, you want to file as soon as you can so that you can get retroactivity back to the change.
so how do you prove that the reduction is under control?
Um,
And is that something you have to prove?
it is definitely something you have to prove. And normally you're going to get right now you're going to be getting some sort of writing, whether it's an email or a letter from your employer. And if you're not getting that, you certainly want to ask for that so that you can establish that, yes, here's what happened to me and here's the date that it occurred.
Okay.
And any employer should be happy to give that to you.
Okay, so what if when this is over, one of the parents takes a new job and it doesn't pay as much? What are the ramifications of that?
Again, thinking ahead to when all this is over, that's going to be pretty much like it is before we had COVID, which is to say that if you're going to take a job that's lesser paying than the job that you had when the support order was entered, just be prepared to say that it was a reasonable decision, and be prepared to show some sort of job search, which, it's kind of laughable to say right now, but, because it's, it's almost unimaginable right now, but you want to be able to say that it was an informed, smart decision that was made with your kid's best interests in mind. Maybe it pays a little less, but it's more stable than the position that you had, the position that you lost. So again, it's one of those things where you want to be able to show, hey, here's the other things I looked at. Maybe they would have required me to move away from my child. So I sure as heck didn't want to do that. So, hey, and it turns out, I was managing a restaurant, and I never thought that was an unstable job, but now I kind of don't feel as comfortable taking another position in that field. So now I've gone into, I don't know, grocery store management or something, now that I realize how critical that field is.
Yeah.
So that's where my technical skills are going to be from now on, Your Honor, and that's why I deserve a change in my order. So it's practical that way. You don't just switch horses in midstream. You have a plan, you have a reason, and you're able to explain why you made the change.
So what if you don't have a court order? What should you do about support?
If you don't have a court order, I say the same thing, contact your co-parent and explain what the situation is. And then you do have a little more leeway. You can pretty much pay what you can afford because you don't have the hammer of a court order.
Right.
But of course, all your co-parent has to do is file for support, and he or she will get a support order when all of the dust settles. So it's a good practice. Pay what you can, be consistent, work with your co-parent in terms of providing documentation. Hey, this was my last paycheck. I don't have severance. I don't have unemployment yet. Once that's all in place, we'll renegotiate the amount, and then try to stay in touch with your co-parent. I find that the people who don't have court orders, they usually do pretty well with each other. They're the ones who will come to us sometimes and say, well, I never really felt I needed an order. He or she knows what the kid costs. He or she knows what activities the child is enrolled in. And so those folks are probably going to do just fine as they go through the analysis of what the new support amount should be, or what a temporary amount should be.
Well, you've just mentioned a best practice in that situation. What are some other best practices that you would advise divorced families to be considering right now?
I would say, again, try to be as tuned into your child or your children as possible, rather than thinking about your own rights. And this is a lot harder to say than it is to do, I think. But the more you can tune into what's going on with your kid, I think the more likely it is that the rest will follow. So I think what you want to try to do is just kind of be aware of the fact that your kids are watching you right now. I think for this generation of kids, it's going to be like maybe September 11th was for our generation. Obviously, we were adults for September 11th, but it's seared in everyone's minds, and the way we all behaved is seared in everyone's minds. And I think the parent who models ethical, reasonable, responsible behavior is the parent who's going to come out ahead in the long run. If you can model the kind of behavior that you would like your kid to exhibit later on, or even now, I think you're far better off than fighting over every single thing that you probably do have a right to fight over, like a missed weekend or something like that. Missed weekends are serious, don't get me wrong, but how you handle yourself as a parent right now is going to be critically important for how your child turns out in the long run. That's what I would kind of point out to folks at this point.
And document.
And document this is, again, easier said than done. You don't need to send that text message that goes on for, 100 things about all the things the other parent did wrong. You want to say, hey, I expect to have little Joey at 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon, like I always do. And then, when the other parent responds like, well, X you and the horse you rode in on, you're not getting little Joey. You want to save that. That's a succinct, concise text exchange that's going to stand you in good stead later when you go to get that lost weekend for makeup time. So that's the kind of thing. Don't be going on and on in the text message about, oh, I don't know, past transgressions, which is very tempting and what many people do. Keep it to the main issue.
Well, Amy, you clearly know your stuff in this area, and we're going to show on the screen some contact information, your email address, along with the address of your law firm, Wisler Pearlstine, so our viewers can get more information on not just family law, but all different areas, but they should feel free to contact you as well as the situation requires, because I certainly know that your heart and soul goes into your practice and to each and every one of your clients. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We have some exciting informational shows coming up in the future. We're going to be talking about inventions and how to protect them with the proper kind of patent, copyright, and trademark laws, or the great book that you just wrote, or the play that you just wrote, or the song you just composed, how to protect those works of intellectual property. We're going to be talking with a lawyer who represents folks who have been sexually abused by the clergy, Boy Scouts, and otherwise, to get some information on those lawsuits and whether anyone in the area should be party to those lawsuits. And we're going to have a program on whistleblowers and much more. So I look forward to seeing you next time, and thanks for tuning in so much. And thank you, Amy, again.
Thank you, Stacy.